Hey there, we are back at it again. I don't want to say by popular demand. I don't even want to say by demand, um, but by choice. We are back. We are submerging into the depths of our brains and our souls. Pastor Jeff, as you can see maybe on the screen, from Parts Unknown, and Pastor Andrew from Rochester, New York. So good morrow to you, sir. Good morning, and hope you're doing well up there, close to Lake Superior, correct? And
There you go.
I'm doing Lake Ontario.
Sure.
Is that the lake?
Yeah.
Lake Ontario.
Yeah.
On the shores of Lake Erie. Myself. So we've continued to have a little bit of feedback from these videos, which we truly appreciate. And as deciding to do this a little bit more, I've actually gone and invested. I don't know if you can tell, invested in some new headphones.
I was gonna mention that.
Yeah, I got him, one, for the video, and two, I'm gonna open up a Twitch account and just start gaming. And hopefully that takes off. My other headphones were wireless, and so they were Bluetooth connected to my computer, and the battery life for them did not last like 45, 50 minutes. And so every once in a while we'd still be in a conversation, and then you would just be talking and it'd be silence for me, and I'm like, did he mute himself, what's going on? And no, it's just the headphone shut off, so I have to take it out and let the sound emit. So these ones have a wire, and yeah, so it's good
Good
times.
story.
I've stalled long enough. All right, so we got some comments. The topic is this, so you're going to want to time this, Andrew, because you're better at this than me. I can't see like if there's like a time thing on here, timetable, but like 2 minutes in before we actually get to the topic. All right, so you might want to put that in the description. The topic this week is going to be this: Luther, Martin Luther. Our denomination is named after this individual. We can even, maybe I might even touch on that at some point during this. But Martin Luther, a little bit of his journey, from where he started to where he ended up, and how, as pastors, one, we might rely or use Luther as a source, and maybe ways that we don't use him that we could, and maybe other ways. Let's do three topics. One, how we use him and how Lutherans can use him. Two, other ways we could use them that we don't typically, but maybe should. And then three, ways that we need to be like, yeah, let's back off that part of Luther. Because I think there's information that can fit into all three of those categories. So I'm going to start off with the most obvious way that I use Luther, and then kind of throw it back to you and see how that lines up with you. For me, the most evident place that I use Luther is during confirmation classes when I'm teaching. So going over Luther's small catechism. I do that every year, if not every year, every other year, depending on the confirmation program that I'm using or that I'm teaching. I've even taught adult classes of Luther's large catechism to adults as well. But yeah, that would be the most obvious place as far as Luther's writings, Luther's works, if you will, that I actually say I needed to use what Luther actually said. So what about you? What is the most obvious place where you reference Martin Luther? To Pastor Andrew.
So
I just want to make sure you're
so
paying attention. No,
it's
you can
somewhat
go.
similar.
It's all right. You can go.
Yeah, thank you. Somewhat similar. When I teach confirmation, of course, we talk about what it is to be a Lutheran. We talk about Martin Luther, a little history there. Of course, with the Reformation and all of that. I just remembered, and I kind of was looking down here.
That's what you were doing. Okay.
I was kind of looking down here in my drawer. Um, I haven't done it at Resurrection, but I may in the future. In fact, I was planning to do it before um, this pandemic hit. Is putting together a I just called it like a Lutheran 101, where
Mm,
we talk about um, it's almost, I don't want to say it's an adult confirmation, but it's kind of the same thing. Like, what are
yeah.
the things we don't know about Luther? Maybe some things that we do, or maybe some things that we've forgotten. And when
Hmm.
I've taught that in the past, um, of course, I'm learning things because I try to be open uh, to continue to learn. Because contrary to what you might believe, I don't know everything. And but I found when I teach classes like that or participate in classes like that, because I'm very class, we're all learning together oriented.
Yeah.
Some people that have been Lutherans their whole life are just like, no, I don't remember that, or oh,
Right.
I never knew that. So, but again, it's the same thing. It's uh, the one thing I tell everyone is Luther. The blessing and the curse of Luther is everything he said was recorded. So everything was recorded. So that's a blessing because we have those things. We look at that Luther's works, which is what, like tons and tons of
Yeah.
volumes.
So much.
And, but, so it's a blessing because we have that, but then it's also a curse because there's lots of stuff that Luther said. You're like, yeah, ooh.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but but the thing is you get. I think that's another thing that at least I've seen in with Luther is, he might say something. Let's say, and again, this is just throwing numbers out, but he might say something like he might have said something like in his 30s where he's like, "Oh, these people are bad, and this needs to happen," and then later in his life, he's like, "Yeah, I shouldn't have said that," and so I think that's a great example for us as Lutherans and as Christians of how we can, how we can grow in what I constantly call, of course, our baptismal journey of
Yeah.
understanding not only with our faith but in life.
Yeah.
And not to go into too much of a tangent, but I mean that's something I really think we need to keep in mind in our world right now.
Yeah. And
I
I
mean,
think, yeah, go ahead. You said, I mean, I want to hear what you meant.
no, I mean, it's just people are people, and we all make mistakes. We're not going to be perfect,
And
and
yeah.
it's all about repentance.
Yeah.
You know,
And I think also that I think there are also certain things that Luther said that he might not have recanted. I don't know if he ever was like sorry for calling the Pope the Antichrist. He might have taken that one to his grave, and I know there's different things like in the Book of Concord, the
oh,
Augsburg
you better explain
Confession.
what that is.
So I don't have my copy here with me at my house, but I do have it memorized. So Book of Concord, just a overview summary of it is it's just the collection, the tome, if you will, of all Lutheran writings. And it's not all Luther. Philip Melanchthon and other people helped write things, um, but it kind of has the summary documents of this is what it means to be Lutheran. This is what we believe. This is how we approach the world, the church, and other Christians or people that we don't deem to be Christian. And so there are definitely some parts in there. Anathema, if you don't know that fun Latin word, anathema just basically means I'm condemning you to hell. They're horrible people. And he says that about the Anabaptists, which today we would just call the Baptists. And he had reasons for it. Uh, he says that about the Pope, um, and some other areas too. Some other theological writers, I think Ulrich Zwingli gets in there sometimes. But even in those times, I would even say that as Lutherans, one of the phrases we claim, which I don't uh, which I don't know if we really embrace as much as we're supposed to. but we claim this idea of always reforming, and I think that should apply even with Luther himself. That if we're constantly being reformed by God, that there are going to be things that even as Lutherans now, 500 years later, we can look back and say we need to revisit that. We need to see
Yeah.
if that still applies, and that's okay. It doesn't. There are some Lutherans, and God bless them all, but there are some Lutherans that say no. We believe exactly what was written in 1517 to 1528. You cannot change one word of it. That was directly from God's mouth to Luther's pen, quill, whatever, to the press, and to those people, I would say, yeah, I think that's a little short-sighted. I think that what he wrote was inspired, truly, but to say that anyone has written something, if I don't know, if I were to look back and someone were to tell me in the future, hey, we're going to take your sermons or your newsletter articles and we're going to canonize them or make them part of like our teaching tradition, I'd say, yeah, let me go back through those again first. I'm not sure of everything that I said. So, going back to the original part, I think confirmation, some adult classes. I've also done some like kind of Lutheran 101 stuff. And as Pastor Andrew said, there's a lot of times, people that have been Lutheran I'm assuming everybody calls them this, but cradle to grave Lutherans, kind of people that were born into the church. Mm-hmm. Sometimes confirmation is like the only quote unquote in-depth Lutheran study that they've ever had.
Yeah.
And so, over time, as Pastor Andrew said, that you go back and be like, oh, wow, I didn't remember that. Or, wow, I've never heard that before. And that's, sometimes I'd even get from people like, why weren't we told this? And I'm like, all right, well, I can't answer, but here's why I think it's important for us to know this now. So I personally, to sort of kind of wrap up this part of the 3-part approach to this, personally, I use Luther, his catechism, his small catechism, the most. Included in there is Luther's morning prayer and evening prayer, and I've used that from time to time as part of devotions because they're pretty short, pretty easy to do, and I don't use as much. I don't use or make it that much use of like his reflections on Bible texts all the times. I won't go back and say, all right, well, what did Luther say about Romans chapter 8? Sometimes I do, but not all the time.
Oh.
Usually when I'm in a pickle, if I'm in a quote unquote pickle, if I'm like, I'm going to talk about this topic, what did Luther have to say about this? I can go to Luther's works. What did Luther say volumes and say, all right, what did he say about purgatory? All right, good. I want to have something about that. What exactly do we believe or not believe about that? And so I'll use that as a reference. But it's not like every week when I'm preparing for my sermon, I cross-reference, what did Luther have to say about this? So that's kind of my wrap on the stuff I do use. Is there anything else you want to say on that first topic or no?
What did you use from Luther? I kind of do. I haven't done that in a while. That's interesting. You brought that up, looking how Luther responded to different Bible texts.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting to do. I haven't actually done that in a while. I mean, specifically.
Right.
Said that, but yeah, I mean, yeah. So.
Okay. So we go topic 2, which was what are some, and you kind of segued. What are some things, are there things with Luther that you think maybe we should use more that we don't make a good use of?
I think, I was just looking through my folder with that Lutheran 101. It was really hard to read my writing, but I think what comes for me is, and maybe for all these topics, is how do we use it in kind of like everyday life as we're out there, just kind of that basis of some of the basic things that he talks about. Of course, Lutherans are all about grace. Yep. And you might say, well, someone's like, well, all Christians are about grace. Are they?
Yeah. Yeah.
But talking about grace and mercy, that was a big focus for Luther, and that in our lives needs to be a big focus. So if it isn't, I would challenge us to say, how do we define grace and how do we define mercy? And
Would you be willing to give a little context as to why grace was so important for him?
um, why was grace so important for him? Uh, yeah, why was it so important for him?
Well, to my recollection, so Luther starting off as a Catholic priest and being part of the Augustinian order, I believe, that the Black Cloister, if you will, that one of the things I think Luther was kind of renowned for as he was a monk priest was how hard he was on himself and how he saw God's wrath, and he saw his sin as such a prominent thing, that he would beat himself up about it. Sometimes physically, sometimes mentally. I think there is one legend that says that Luther used to go to confession so much that his confessor, told him, like, hey, you need to stop coming so much. Like every time you fart, you come in here and confess, and stop, And so, I think his stumbling upon it, and it wasn't, which is an interesting thing that I just remembered right now. It's cool. It's a cool thing for us to remember that back at that time, just because you were a monk, even because you were a priest, didn't mean you had access to or you knew the Bible. You knew the liturgical texts. So I think a big part of that came from Luther's further degrees, him getting his doctorate in biblical studies. And as he started to translate some of the Bible and go through the Bible, he started going like, wait a second, And so when he stumbles upon grace and God reveals and says like, hey, look at this, I think that was, in part the reason that grace was so important to him. It's kind of like a Saul/Paul thing where it was like Luther was so about the law that grace was that much more important to him because he was so used to just beating himself up about it.
Yeah.
That he was like, oh my gosh, now I don't have to feel like garbage every day. God actually loves me. So yeah, I think that's kind of why grace is, but it's so ingrained in us as Lutherans that we, it's just like, well, yeah, we do. And as you pointed out, which I think is amazing, you talk to any other Christian, they'll be like, well, no, we're down with grace too. And you're like, one, are you? Or two, that's not your focal point. Yeah. Like everything isn't judged from that lens. For us, that's everything flows out of that. So it's talking about grace, talking about his use of the scriptures. How do you then, I'm going to switch it up a little bit because this is still Luther and it's Lutheran theology based. How do you deal with the whole topic? And if you want to tell me to not talk about it today, that's fine. It can be its whole own discussion, about that balance that Luther tried to balance between being sinner and saint, having that grace, that can it go too far? Can grace ever go too far? Can we misuse God's grace?
Can grace ever go too far?
And I'm sorry for hijacking this part of the discussion, but it just came to me, and I think that's a good question. Can grace ever be abused?
I'll have to think about that one. My initial answer would be no. I don't know how grace could go too far.
Like the idea of cheap grace.
Well, yeah.
That's okay. Yeah. So in that light.
Yeah, it can't. What's synonymous for me when you're thinking about grace, but it's also one of those things that it's something to constantly think about, is the synonymous with grace and forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
You talked Yeah, just to kind of step back a little bit. So you talked about in Luther's life, he was all about the law.
Hmm.
And the one thing that comes out of Luther is law and gospel and how you have to have both.
Yeah.
Um, and if you don't, then, there's this imbalance of, um, I almost want to say an imbalance of your relationship with God, because it's not all about judgment in a negative sense with law. But then again, law isn't all negative either.
Right.
Um, so, yeah, law and gospel, law and grace, grace and mercy. But yeah, grace, I think it can't go too far when thinking about God's grace for
Mm.
us, but we can turn it into cheap grace by just being like, oh, well, whatever. I have God's grace, so this is all fine and this is good.
Right.
And, you know, it's not it's almost like a cheap grace is like just not acknowledging the meaning of grace for us, or the meaning of mercy, or not even living that. It's, I don't know if any of this is making sense, but
No, it is. It is. Keep going. Is it time to wash your hands?
yeah, my watch tells me when to wash my hands. It just started doing that a few months ago, so now everyone knows that. um I don't know that. See, everything is so synonymous for me, and I guess I haven't really thought about this in depth in quite a while. But I mean, you can't have grace and forgiveness works in there. God is a God of love. Luther, yeah, he physically would beat himself, and that's true. I mean, maybe we say it's legend, but he did. He was told by his abbot, is that it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, they're like, he was like, yeah, you confess too much,
Yeah.
and that's very Augustinian. August, Augustine, however you want to say his name, uh, was constantly, like, through his whole life, couldn't forgive himself for stealing an apple when he was like a kid,
Right.
stealing it because he was hungry. He's like, well, this is a sin, right? And it seems so simple, but it was like that one thing, mixed with others, of course, drove him to just reevaluate his relationship with God and what that means. Um, and I'm just kind of rambling here, but
No, I think you're so like what part of what I'm hearing you say, which I think is really good, is that from when it comes to God and grace, it can never be too far. One, because it's not up to us to put any limit on it, because that's God. Like we're just receiving it. However, it becomes cheap or flippant or, less than what it was intended to be based on how we receive it and how we make use of it, if you
yeah, I
will.
think if we use it as a weapon, then obviously it's gone too far.
Yeah.
Where it's
Yeah.
just like, well, I have God's grace, so that leaves me free to go and do something that's just, I mean, horrible and hurting someone else.
Right.
Because
Right.
that's the thing, is everyone has it.
Right. And I think,
Everyone
all
has.
right, yeah, everyone has it, and it's leading me to another. I'm remembering some other Luther quotes, in part because I think I saw something on Facebook recently that stated this, but it was, this that idea that the God's grace, and I think this plays into everything that's happening in the world right now. God's grace gives us freedom, but it's like this freedom to be a servant. So it's like this weird
Yeah.
thing because I imagine freedom to be like, well, now I'm in charge. I'm free. I'm in charge. But it's like the freedom that it gives is meant to be taken and then used in a way that like pays it forward, if you will, or pays it back.
Yeah.
And we are servant of none. I don't know exact phrasing, but servant of all kind of thing.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for, is
Yeah,
I can never get that quite right.
neither can I.
So
Obviously,
after like 12 years, I was like, I just need to print that out.
yeah.
And that's what I was looking for, but now I can't find it.
Well, if you find it, enlighten us. But it's something. It's paraphrased. And I think that that plays into, so if we're going to say, like, how does this apply? How does Luther apply? How does Lutheran theology, whatever, apply to daily life now? Our whole country right now is wrapped up in, like, what does freedom mean? And what does personal freedom mean? And, you know, how do we use that freedom? I think how we use our freedom says a lot about us. The fact that we're free says a lot about God. How we
Yeah.
use our freedom says a lot about us.
Yeah, here I found
I
that
just
quote.
made that up. All right, yeah, go ahead.
A Christian is a perfectly free Lord of all, subject to none. A Christian is a perfectly dutiful servant of all, subject to all.
Yeah. So there's that paradox of Lutheran theology. Paradox comes up again and again, both and, if you will. Yeah, I never remember that. So thank you. So I guess maybe, like, that is kind of an answer in, like, in that second part of what we're talking about, because there's a lot of really good nuggets of information that we've probably heard from time to time. That, yeah, wow, it's not so much. So I'm going to approach it this way. It's not so much that, do I need to use them more or whatever? I don't know about that. But I would say that every once in a while I'm reminded of, oh my gosh, the way I behave was ingrained by that mantra, by that line. And it's so ingrained in me now that I don't even remember the line, but it's affected how I live. All right. So we got number three, because I'm back on numbers. Number C, Roman numeral I. Are there parts of Luther, and if you want me to take the lead on this one, I will, because I'm unabashedly willing to do it, because no one knows where to find me, that if for Luther, they would say, this is somewhere where I think we've grown from something maybe he initially taught, or things about Luther that we have to notice and say, you know, this doesn't represent us anymore.
Well, I think the big thing is, I'm sorry, I just jumped in.
Actually,
I'm not sorry at all.
No, I know. I've met you.
Yeah. The big thing that, of course, comes to mind is how Luther bashed the Jews.
There you go.
So he bashed Jewish people. So, I mean,
not physically. Not physically. Let's be clear, but just in case. Yeah.
But, you know, and a lot of that stuff, and see, again, blessing and curse, because, you know, and this kind of goes with the stereotype for Lutherans, especially as, you know, you'll see a lot of Luther quotes, which, I don't know, is attributed to Luther, and sometimes to Benjamin Franklin. You know, it's like, God made beer, and this is why, and how Lutherans drink all the time. But the thing is, Luther did enjoy his beer.
He did.
So, you know, he would have pub talks, really, and he would drink, and he may or may not have been drunk, and he would say things like, you know, all Jews are bad. Of course, it was a bit worse than that.
It was a lot worse than that.
It was a lot worse than that. And someone's like, oh, Luther just said this, and they wrote it down.
Yeah.
But see, that's something actually that he recants much later. He's like, I shouldn't have said that. But he said it originally, and that's what people focus on. And it's sad, because just a bit of commentary on our world, someone can do something in their younger life, and even later they're like, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. Well, that gets ignored. And, well, you said this, and you should have known.
Yeah.
I mean, so, but, you know, it's things like that. That's the big one. A lot of people hold on to that, but we've grown, obviously, from that.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully.
Yeah, we should have grown from that.
We should have grown from that. But I mean, I've met people, even leaders in different Lutheran denominations, that are like, oh yeah, Luther said that, so really that's what we should believe. It's one of the reasons, many reasons, that when I felt God's call to ministry, that it was through the ELCA. Because, see, that's for me, and I know this is a bit of a tangent, for me, that's one reason I feel, and no denomination has it right, so please hear that. One of the reasons I feel comfortable in the ELCA church is it seems that the goal and the push for us as Lutherans is to do exactly what Luther wanted to be, is to evangelize. Now, different, of course, from
Right.
the name that's thrown out now for evangelicals. We are the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, but evangelical meaning we're going to go out and share the word, and live it. So anyway, a bit of a tangent there, but it's growing. It's this constant, almost, I want to say, evolution of not only Lutheranism, but then also Christianity. How do we welcome others and work with others? That we have all these, well, not all, but we have a bunch of agreements with other denominations to say, we differ on these things, but our focus is that one church that we profess in the creeds. We are the one church, capital C, all of us. And that's what I see as the ELCA doing. And I really think, I want to believe that if Luther were here now, yeah, he'd have some issues with some things, I'm sure. He's like, hey, think about this. But I think that's what he would say. We need to think about this. Is that the way that God's calling us to work through things? But I think, he never wanted I know I'm jumping around. He never wanted the Reformation to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to believe when you look at the 95 Theses that he posted that he was just looking to start a discussion. But
He was like a teenage girl, and I only say that, or boy. I say teenage girl. Teenager.
teenager.
That's teenager. I apologize. I'm just referencing my own daughter, who is a teenager who is very adamant about her opinion. My daughter could write 95 texts to me in a row, stating why I was wrong about something. So Luther was very. He believed what he said. I mean, he was passionate. But yeah, as you were saying, and I'll let you keep going on that the original intention wasn't, there was no other church. The intention wasn't to get kicked out.
Yeah.
The intention was, hey, we need to talk about this. The intention was, hey, you're off in Rome. I'm over here in Germany. I don't think you know what's happening in Germany that people are saying you said they could do. So you need to find out what people are doing in your name. Unfortunately, the Pope was like, yeah, no, I sent those people there. But yeah, it was starting a discussion.
That's really what he wanted to do, is start a discussion again. But you read the stuff, and as you had mentioned, he calls the Pope the Antichrist.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not a real good.
It's a hard way. It's a hard one to walk back.
Yeah, it's a hard
nowhere
one
to go from
back.
there. You're at 11 already.
But and that reminds me of another thing, because 3 years ago we celebrated 500 years of Lutheranism, of the Reformation.
Yeah.
And where have we moved? So we've moved from Luther saying the Pope is the Antichrist, and even up until Vatican II, which was the, for lack of a better term, just the Catholic Council in the early 1960s, where it was only then that they changed their belief as Roman Catholic Church, that Protestants, Lutherans in particular, were all going to hell because we had it wrong.
Yeah.
They still didn't say that, but in 60 pages, they kind of got pretty close to saying, well, I guess you're okay now. But, so both churches have moved forward in that.
Mm-hmm.
But, I'm reminded 3 years ago, the 500th anniversary, I went to a worship service at a Catholic church where we Roman Catholics and Lutherans stood next to each other, worshiped, and celebrated this growth in the Church Universal.
Yeah.
It was a very powerful experience to stand and sit in this elaborate and just gorgeous sanctuary with Roman Catholics, a Roman Catholic bishop, our bishop, and a bunch of Lutherans. Many Roman Catholics, of course, had red on to celebrate it, red, the color of the Reformation. Very powerful. Look how far we've moved forward to be able to do that.
And the reality is that, over time as well, of that growth, that was at the time, it was the break.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's been many, many, many more breaks after that. And nowadays we look, and I tell members wherever I've served, if you were to sit down, if you were to put a group of Christians, and this isn't put down other Christians, but if you were to put a group of Christians in a room from different denominations and said, where do your beliefs and your practices match up with the most? There's so many similarities between us and the Catholics, us and the Episcopalians, us and, I would say, there's a sliding scale, but even, with UCC, some with Reformed Church, the different churches we're in communion with, Methodists, but really there's a lot we have in common. So I think that's something, and that's something that I would say that if Luther were here today and he said, no, I still think they're wrong, and that's it. I think that as a body, we would say, yeah, no, we're not sure about that, So I think that reforming, I think what Luther did, and I think one of his greatest accomplishments, whether or not he intended to do it, was something you just hit on, which was discussion and dialogue.
Yeah.
So grace, we hold up grace. That is our foundation. Grace in the cross and the resurrection. However, mercy that flows from that. However, I think discussion and dialogue is a great legacy as well, because once that door was open to, hey, we need to reevaluate and talk about things. How is God working? Yeah. That's a door, hopefully, that never closes, that we can continue to say, how is that working for us now? How can we do better now? What is God maybe saying to us in this situation? And I personally believe that Lutherans, everyone's obviously entitled to their own belief, but I personally believe that anybody who says, look, what we did at this point in time right here was the perfect example and the only thing that is true, I think that all those people have tunnel vision and are short-sighted. And you lose out at what God is creating every day, and doing every day. So I mean, there are some specific examples. I would say, to kind of sum it up, the stuff of Luther that we would kind of shun now would be anywhere that Luther was condemning or writing off wholeheartedly any group today. We would say, yeah, let's continue in that discussion and that dialogue. But other than that, there are so many things that he said, that he wrote about, that really have impacted us and have formed us as who we are as a denomination. And they're part of our DNA. So,
well, and one of it's just, for me, it's just that constant evolving in our beliefs and time. I mean, obviously, you have to take so many things into account as you think about stuff. I mean, Luther I guess it was the 16th century, just that whole context.
Yeah.
Context of Germany, context of Europe, context of kings. I mean, it's completely different, and it's something that no one now can really fully understand, because it's different. Yeah, England, they have queens and kings, but they're not the same kind of queens and kings that you had then.
Yeah, the social system is completely different. Society is.
Yeah, and you have to take that into account. And I think that's, in daily life, that's just what we need to take into account with everything.
Yeah,
it is. I think it's just all about dialogue and discussion, and oh my goodness, what a pastor thing to say, loving our neighbor and listening to our neighbor
Yeah.
and being open to change.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Never closing the book on what God could be saying to us.
yeah.
Not just directly, but through the words or actions of another person.
Yeah.
Always allow ourselves to be surprised by something that I think Luther was surprised completely by the grace of God when he encountered it. We need to allow ourselves to be surprised by various things too.
Yeah. Well, and I think we're trying to sum up here, but so much stuff keeps coming in my mind.
Yeah, go for it.
Especially as a Sunday when we get like parable overload from Jesus.
Yeah. Here we go. He's making it rain with parables.
But he tells that parable. I think it's a parable of like the three. He gives coins.
Yeah.
Guy gives coins. Okay, so one of them buries it. One of it goes and invests it. So that's the church. So if we had everything about the church and it's that coin, and we bury it, and then later it's like, look, I have this, and nothing's changed. Do we really think?
Was that the intention?
Is that the intention? Do we really think if, Christ is like, all right, here's the gift of the church, and he comes back tomorrow, and we're like, look, the church is the same.
Yeah.
Do you really think he's going to be like, oh, hey, super? Or is he going to be like, I gave you this gift, but what have you done with it?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. How have you invested it in other places that's going to return back even more for me?
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. So I think, if nothing else, to say, how does Luther apply to our daily lives? And if you have that question in your mind, I would say, jump into a little bit of Luther, just read a little bit, whether it's a part of the catechism, or I will say this, at least for our place, I would assume it's true for you as well. I mean, obviously we have the internet now, so you can get pretty much whatever you want. But if anybody from my congregation where I serve, said like, hey, do you have something about Luther, this, or something about Lutherans, this, if you need something, come to me and I'll be like, yeah, here, borrow this book, this, whatever. Or if it's something online, I can say, well, check out this page, check out this source. And I would say, just dive into it a little bit and see whether or not it resonates with you. See if, oh my gosh, wow, yeah, I really do agree with that. Or if there's something that you have a question about, write it down. And that's something to bring to your pastor, to bring to somebody else and say, it says this here, but I don't know why. So I think the other main thing that I will end with, and you can keep talking, I'm down with that, is that, Luther, and you see it in his catechism, Luther, and I think Lutheran theology, we don't do it the best all the time, but it's designed to be a thinking faith.
Yes.
Why is this happening? We need to talk about this. Why is this like this? And so even if you find something within Lutheran writings or something from Luther's life or just the Lutheran Church, that don't just accept, I mean, it's great if to accept something at face value, but don't do it to the detriment of going deeper and learning more. I think that is a big part also of the legacy of that is the discussion, the dialogue is discovery. We want to keep discovering ways that God is at work. So I've enjoyed this. I'm going to be honest with everybody, since I'm the one talking right now, and he can jump in if he wants, or edit this part of the video out if he wants.
You're recording, dude. It's all you.
I know, but you can go back and re-edit it if you want. You're smart, and you have teenagers that can help. That when we first started talking before we hit the record button, it was like, all right, how do we do this? how is this going to happen? We didn't have a bunch of resources laid out in front of us. Like, all right, I'm going to draw from this and draw from that. But I think it was good for me. Discussion needed to think about these things and remember connections, and in other areas too, where maybe I'm like, yeah, I don't know about that. but it was a good discussion. So hopefully, if you're watching, you got something out of this, whether it was an answer, whether it was a talking point, whether it was a question or concern. All those things are awesome. Feel free to respond with those in comments. Feel free to respond with emails to Pastor Andrew or to myself. And yeah, until we do another one of these, I don't know if you have anything else to say. If not, I'm just thank you for this opportunity again.
Yeah, just the last thing I want to say is ditto to all that. And then also that's the one thing about Lutheranism is it is a thinking, I would say a thinking denomination, because it's a faith that also asks why, why this?
Yeah.
Why do you believe this? What's behind that for you?
What does this mean?
Yeah. What does this mean? More than, well, Luther said this is what it means. And that's what I constantly am preaching. Yeah. Not what Luther said, but okay, so Luther said this, but what does this mean to you?
Yeah.
What is this saying to you? How is your faith interwoven here?
Very good. Yeah, good. I like that. I'm enjoying that. That turned out better than I thought it would. And we can actually post this. So so the only fun story I'll share today is brief. It's a little dialogue discussion that Pastor Andrew and I were having beforehand. One of our classmates recently shared with us a video that was made that you should look up. That was made years ago when we were in seminary, and it was a discussion about whether or not I was there at the time or whatever. So we talked about that. That was good. But it also reminded, so yesterday was the anniversary of my ordination, 14 years. And I know yours has got to be coming up pretty soon, I would think.
2 months.
In 2 months? Okay. So maybe another topic, if anybody would be interested in that, would be just, can you remember the day you were ordained and what you thought and what you were getting yourself into? That might be a fun thing to do.
I do remember that day.
So do I. Not your day, but I remember my day. Yeah. All right. Good times. I appreciate it. I'm going to hit stop recording. And everybody, hope you had a good day, and we'll see you in this format soon.